Well, we're now at Ubisoft Montreal. The studio was founded in 1997. It's one of many studios that Ubisoft has around the world. And the company itself actually started in 1986. The first game that we worked on in Montreal was a car racing game called Speedbusters, and it came out in November 1998. And soon after that, we were working on a series game from using the Playmobil license. This is our historic building in Montreal. It's an old clothing factory that we've been revamping over the years. So we have about 1,300 employees here in Montreal, and everyone is in the same building, right in the heart of the Mile End. Well, we've worked on several of Ubisoft's key franchises in our Montreal studio. Among those, you can think about Splinter Cell. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell was done here. Among the Rainbow Six series were done here. Myst, Prince of Persia, and many more that you'll come to know over the years. Well, Montreal right now is definitely one of the hotspots for creating video games in the world. It's one of the great places for new music. You look at all the different bands that are coming out of Montreal. And I think when you bring all that together, it's one of the most interesting places to work in games and to make games.
My name is Ben Mattis, and I'm the producer on Prince of Persia 3. Before Prince of Persia 3, I worked for 4.5 years in the wireless gaming industry, a year and a half of which was spent at Gameloft, Ubisoft's sister company. And at Gameloft, we worked primarily on taking Ubisoft branded titles and porting them, if you will, to the wireless gaming space. We wanted to lay the foundation, which we did with Sands of Time, and we created the foundation of an action-adventure game that was primarily based on adventure, platforming, and puzzle solving with a basic combat sort of mechanic. But once that foundation was built upon, Warrior Within and now Prince of Persia 3 are adding to that. We've maintained the platforming element and have added sort of incremental improvements both in Warrior Within and in Prince of Persia 3, but we really feel that that's just been the foundation upon which things like the speed kill system and the freeform fighting system really add to. We've always had the ambition to create complementary gameplay mechanics, so we never felt like these new things that we were adding didn't merge well with the idea of a platforming, puzzling game. The theme of Sands of Time was certainly one of sort of innocence shattered. So the prince was, non-tested in the field of combat. He was a little bit naive. It was sort of this story of his mistakes born of that naivety, causing this huge problem, this colossal releasing of the sands, which basically destroyed ruined the world, if you will, and him sort of trying to atone for those mistakes and address the problem. If you see his personality in that game, it's really one of the young, naive prince who's sort of learning about the world and learning about the consequences of his actions, never really taking responsibility for those actions. And then if you look at Warrior Within, there's a little bit of an evolution, or a lot of an evolution. You have a much more jaded, darker prince. A bunch of time has passed since Sands of Time. He's seen a lot more, he's done a lot more, he's got a lot more on his shoulders, and he's certainly a lot more jaded, he's a lot darker, he's a lot more reckless and ruthless. If you look at the style of combat in Warrior Within, it focused a lot on combat and sort of the gritty, dark nature of the prince. So the theme there was much more one of maturity, perhaps of the sort of attitude of having seen it all and being a little bit jaded. And then the theme in the third one, in Prince of Persia 3, is really the evolution of the epic hero. So we've created the story of a naive prince, a jaded prince, and now we have the split, the light prince and the dark prince, which literally allow us to concentrate the good into one form and the bad into another form. And yes, this is the closing of the Sands of Time trilogy. I certainly think fans can expect to see more of Prince of Persia in coming years, but this is the end of the Sands of Time trilogy. When this game wraps up, there is a very firm, conclusive conclusion to the story, to all the main characters. We finally find out what happens to the prince. We finally find out what happens, for example, to Kailina and what becomes of the Sands of Time. And it wraps things up in a very neat and clean way. Leaves a little bit to the imagination, but I think certainly gives all of the answers to the most burning questions that fans have had over the last 2.5 years. Of course, it's been a difficult challenge because we always want everything we do to tie back to what makes the Prince the Prince. I mean, he's a very distinctive personality, and we don't ever want to depart from that. Every new gameplay feature that we add to the game has to feel like it's realistic, given what people know about the Prince's abilities and his history and his character personality, and also that fits within the theme, within the era, if you will. And that also has a little bit of the Prince touch, so maybe a little bit of sarcasm and wit in terms of dialogue and whatnot, but also maybe a little bit of acrobatic abilities, combat mastery. So, you know, if we take something, for example, like the chain on the Sand Prince, which he uses in his freeform fighting system. This is something that we really wanted to have a Prince touch to. We wanted it to really feel like this is an acrobatic combat master who happens to have this additional weapon at his disposal. So when he's doing his moves, that you still really feel that sort of sense of fluid motion, of real sort of mastery over his body and what it's capable of doing. And so the moves are very graceful, they're very dramatic. There's a lot of sort of flourishes and finishing moves that people who, you know, are familiar with, for example, the freeform fighting system of Warrior Within will look at and say, yeah, you know what, that's the Prince of Persia. Maybe it's the Dark Prince, but it's the Prince of Persia nonetheless. We see his acrobatic skills and we see what we love about the Prince in this new combat system. So that's just an example of how whenever we've added any new gameplay feature, we've always brought it back to the question of, does this fit within the theme of Prince of Persia as a whole? And is this something that the Prince as a character would actually do? And in every case, the answer is, I hope the fans will agree, always yes.
Hello, my name is JC and I work as a creative director on Prince of Persia 3 working title. Before Prince of Persia 3, I worked on Prince of Persia 2, Prince of Persia 1, so Warrior Within, Sands of Time, and prior to this I worked on Rayman titles, The Great Escape and Rayman Arena. My job as a creative director is twofold. In the beginning of the game, I work closely with a creative team, meaning a scriptwriter, an art director, an animation director, quite a lot of people, level designers too, in order to define what the scope of the game is and what the game will be in the end. So that's where we draw all the blueprints for the game to come. And then later on in the game, my job is mainly to make sure that everybody shares the same vision and is on the same track on this. The difference with the producer is that the producer is usually the guy who is on the phone all day, who is frowning and has a lot of problems, whereas my life is much easier. In fact, I think it's an evolution of the Prince throughout the 3 games that is quite important because it's set on a trilogy. Quite usually on the trilogy, the second part in the trilogy is the darkest one, and well, it's a part of the character arc to go from the Prince character arc to go from the naive Prince who was a little bit arrogant and made a mistake. In the end, he made it all right, but by dodging it, to someone who then is chased by an enemy, becomes a darker character, tries the best he can to survive, and with very selfish goals. And in the end, what we try to bring in Prince of Persia 3 is to make the Prince become the hero he is supposed to be. So the evolution is that the lighter tone from Sands of Time will come back in Prince of Persia 3, as the character of the Prince will evolve from selfish to more selfless, and the hero and when he stands as a prince for his people. The darker tone has been tamed in the sense that it's more a mix between the 2 moods of the previous games, since the Prince will evolve from the character he was at the end of Prince of Persia 2 to this Prince of Persia. When making a game, of course, we take into account the consumer feedback, but we have to be very careful on what we consider being consumer feedbacks. We have several sources of feedback from the consumers, one being the boards, for example. But we need to be quite wary about the boards because usually it's the people who didn't like the game who come here, so they kind of complaint, which is normal, but not always constructive and does not always represent the majority of the players. We have marketing surveys that tend to give us more general information and statistics, which are very nice. And finally, we do a lot of playtesting throughout each step of the game creation that enable us to see how players react to different aspects of the game, quality-wise, but also their understanding and their appreciation of all kind of aspects of the game. Of course, we try to make it also. We try to make things that we like. So it's usually a compromise to find between all these aspects, and between the needs of Ubisoft, between what we'd like to do, and between what information we can get from consumer feedback. But usually, the consumer feedback is always like king, since it's meant for the consumer. The way we deal with ideas is we try to this is more production-wise, but it's much more efficient if we concentrate the ideas in the beginning phase. We open the scope a lot. We make sure that we have all these crazy ideas, really a lot, wild, crazy things. And then we concentrate a little bit more, and we try to cut everything that is not in the scope of the game and that is a little bit weird. And later on in production, we try to incorporate all the good ideas, but as the constraints are getting much more present in the production process, it's much harder to incorporate an idea that compromises other things. So we'll have to find ways, and usually it's more in the beginning that we have a lot of ideas and we incorporate them, and during the production it's smaller ideas, smaller scale elements, etc. Well, personally, what I think interesting on this game is working with all the people here around. The fact that they are all very talented, that it places a lot of challenge on us because we take decisions and we try to renew everything every time. We try to make it better, to bring new elements. I mean, it's really a new experience. It's taking a risk, and that's what makes it interesting. It's not the same game every year. Sometimes it doesn't work out as intended, but at least we deserve credit for trying to change it, whereas we could just bring out the same game every year again. That's what I like, making new things.
So hi everyone, my name is Ben Mattis. I'm the producer on Prince of Persia 3. Today we're going to do a walking tour through the production floor, show you all the various departments that are working to bring Prince of Persia to you, and I hope you enjoy it. So we're going to start the far edges of our team, our illustrator team. The illustration team takes the vision of the artistic director and the creative director, brings it to life, character sketches, environment sketches, creates the artwork that we then give to the rest of the team in order to turn into the actual game assets that we use in the game. So just follow me on this way. In the corner here we have our management team. It's made up of the producers, associate producers, and project coordinator. And on both sides of me here, we have our level art and our level designer team. We've interspersed the two in order to make sure that we always have level artists and level designers working close together. The level designers create the actual gameplay, the actual level organization, and then the level artists inherit the basic max files and improve them, make them look pretty, make them look gorgeous, make them look prints. So behind me we have where the marketing team sits. The production of Prince of Persia 3 has its own integrated marketing team, which is very important to help ensure that production and marketing are working as closely as possible together. Right here you have our creative core. This is the beating heart creatively of the entire project. It's very important that this team be situated right in the middle of the floor, because daily they have people from all departments coming to ask them questions about the creative vision of the game, the artistic vision of the game, etc. They need to be very easily accessible. The last thing we have here is our data management team. This is where every day people from all sorts of departments come by in order to check the latest build, check the status of the build, check for bugs, review the content, make sure that everything's going properly. So as we go down this aisle, to the left and to the right, we have our programming teams, both engine programming and the AI programmers. The engine programmers are obviously the people who make sure that the game works properly on the PS2, on the Xbox, the GameCube, and the PC. The AI programmers are the ones who create
all of the artificial intelligence that powers both all the characters and the enemies that you'll encounter in Prince of Persia 3. So we just came down the corridor of programmers and AI programmers, and interspersed with the AI programmers, as we do with level designers and level artists, we have animators. So the AI programmers create the code that powers the characters, and the animators animate them and make them look great. A hallmark of Prince of Persia is the quality of our animations. If you then pan around, you'll see that we have two other departments that I should talk about. The first is the character modelers. They create the actual characters and all of the textures that you see in the game. And finally, in the back corner, we have our sound team, our sound designers and our sound integrators. They design the audio as it appears in the game, both dialogue and music and ambient sounds, and then integrate it into the game, syncing it up exactly in time with the animations so that it all comes together in a nice whole. So there you have it, everyone, a quick walking tour through the production of Prince of Persia 3. You've seen today over 120 people spread across more than 5 different departments, working in conjunction, bringing it all together to bring Prince of Persia 3 to life for you to play. I hope you enjoy it.